I didn't suspect the infidelity first. I suspected the math. The numbers on the shared credit card statements didn't lie, even if my wife did. The five-figure withdrawals, marked cryptically as investment seed round, felt like a cold, calculating hand reaching into my wallet. It was a violation far deeper than a simple affair. I build systems for a living, clean architectures, predictable outcomes. These charges had neither. They appeared in clusters, always just below alert thresholds, always timed after I'd been traveling. Clara knew my routines. She knew my tolerance for noise. I printed the statements and laid them out on my desk like a crime scene. Patterns emerged fast. Merchant codes tied to shell vendors. Cash advances routed through fintech apps I'd never installed. The phrasing irritated me most. Business expenses. There was no business. Clara had hobbies, tastes, ambitions, but no enterprise. When I asked her casually, she smiled too quickly. Said it was temporary, that I wouldn't notice. She underestimated one thing. I don't feel first. I calculate. And the calculation said this wasn't sloppiness. It was theft with intention, executed by someone who believed proximity was permission. I pulled 6 months of data and reconciled every transaction against our known expenses. The delta was obscene. Nearly $400,000 had vanished, not into luxury goods or hotels, but into accounts designed to look productive. That told me everything. Affairs are messy. Fraud is tidy. Clara floated through the house with new confidence, buying time with charm. She spoke about future leverage and building something meaningful. The language was borrowed. I'd heard it 1,000 times in pitch rooms. She was repeating someone else's optimism without understanding its liabilities. I checked our credit report at 2 a.m. A new line of credit glared back at me. 7 figures. My name was on it. My signature was immaculate. Too immaculate. I know my own pressure curves, the way my hand drags on a stylus. This was a reproduction, not an origin. That night, I slept well. SHE&HE does that for me. In the morning, I initiated a quiet audit of every shared asset. No accusations. No scenes. Emotion complicates evidence. Clara hummed in the kitchen, convinced she was ahead of me. She thought wealth made me careless. She never understood that wealth only sharpened my attention. The affair revealed itself as a byproduct, not a cause. I traced one vendor to a co-working space downtown. A failed startup registry led me to a name, Liam. 27. Founder. Visionary. Insolvent. The classic profile of a man who mistakes access to capital for competence. Clara mentioned him once, casually, as a consultant. That was enough. I ran a background check myself and found the gaps she was trying to fill with my money. Burn investors. Dissolved LLCs. A pattern of enthusiasm followed by silence. He needed a patron. Clara needed to feel essential. The forged documents were elegant. My digital certificate embedded, timestamps adjusted, approval staged. She'd used my own systems against me, counting on familiarity to disguise the crime. It was almost flattering. Almost. I watched her that evening as she spoke about us and long-term positioning. She believed intimacy granted immunity. She believed I would clean this up because I always clean things up. That assumption became the axis of my response. I wasn't angry. Anger is inefficient. I was curious about how far she'd gone and how precisely she'd fall. I hired a private investigator the way I do most things, quietly through a referral chain that doesn't advertise. He was former financial crimes, expensive, and allergic to drama. We agreed on facts only. No moral commentary. Within a week, he delivered a preliminary map. Funds flowed from our cards into a holding account, then bled into Liam's startup like plasma into a patient who refused surgery. Office rent, developer salaries, marketing spend with no conversion. Clara was listed as an angel advisor. The joke landed heavily. More troubling was the loan. The bank believed I'd personally guaranteed it. The documents included video verification, deep-faked, but convincing. Clara had paid for quality. She'd also left fingerprints everywhere. IP overlaps. Device reuse. Sloppy metadata. The investigator asked if I wanted to confront her. I declined. Confrontation signals fear. I wanted momentum. I asked him to keep digging, to document everything, to prepare it as if for trial. Because that's where this belonged. Not in a bedroom argument, but under fluorescent lights with a court reporter recording every breath. The deeper the investigator went, the clearer Clara's psychology became. She wasn't stealing to escape me. She was stealing to impress him. Liam spoke in futures and valuations. Clara translated that into entitlement. She believed proximity to my wealth conferred authorship over it. Emails showed her pushing him to think bigger. She promised backing. She promised safety. She promised that Michael signs things without reading. That line stayed with me. It wasn't hatred. It was dismissal. The forged signature appeared again, this time on a vendor agreement that exposed me to regulatory risk. That crossed from betrayal into threat. I authorized the investigator to secure sworn statements from former employees of the startup. They were eager. Unpaid wages encourage honesty. At home, Clara grew more affectionate. She sensed turbulence, but misread its direction. She spoke about marriage as a brand, about weathering storms. I nodded. I let her believe my silence was loyalty. In reality, it was sequencing. You don't interrupt a process mid-execution. You let it complete, then analyze the output. We compiled a dossier thick enough to bruise. Timelines, transaction logs, expert analysis on the forged biometrics. Liam's role was clear, but secondary. He was reckless. Clara was deliberate. I consulted my attorney, not to defend, but to detach. We moved assets methodically, invoking clauses Clara had never read. Trusts restructured. Accounts separated. Powers of attorney revoked. Each step was legal, reversible in theory, devastating in practice. I also secured a forensic report affirming identity theft. That mattered. Fraud becomes personal when your name is the weapon. Clara noticed the changes. She asked if I was pulling away. I said I was optimizing. She laughed, relieved. She thought I was distracted by work. The investigator confirmed the final piece. Clara had attempted to refinance the loan, doubling exposure days before discovery. Desperation masquerading as ambition. That attempt failed, leaving a clean trail straight to her. When everything was ready, I instructed one final move. I would not accuse her. I would inform the institution she'd defrauded, anonymously, precisely, with enough evidence to force action without revealing my hand. The bank responded faster than I expected. Algorithms recognized patterns I helped design. An internal investigation opened. Accounts froze. Liam panicked. Clara called me from the kitchen, voice tight, asking if I'd noticed a glitch. I told her no. The investigator stepped back, his work complete. He reminded me that outcomes were unpredictable. I reminded him that variables were controlled. Within days, formal notices arrived, addressed to Clara. Requests for documentation. Interviews scheduled. She oscillated between confidence and fear. She told Liam I would handle it. She told me it was just paperwork. I watched her carefully. This was the last phase where she believed in rescue. Belief makes people careless. She forwarded me emails she shouldn't have. She asked me to sign things I refused without explanation. The trap wasn't sprung with force. It closed with silence. Every option she thought she had required my participation. I had removed myself from the equation. What remained was her crime, fully illuminated, with no shadow left for me to stand in. I contacted the bank's fraud unit through a counsel intermediary. No names, no emotion, just evidence. They escalated to federal authorities. That decision was theirs, not mine. I prefer clean lines of responsibility. Clara's demeanor shifted. The house filled with tension she couldn't name. She tried nostalgia. She tried seduction. She tried guilt. Each attempt assumed a shared emotional ledger. There wasn't one. She asked if I loved her. I said love wasn't relevant. Accuracy was. The first subpoena arrived. She cried in the bathroom, then emerged composed, asking me to call my lawyer. I declined. I told her she should call hers. The look she gave me then was pure confusion. She still believed wealth implied protection. At night, I slept deeply. Freedom has a sedative quality. The investigation widened. Liam flipped quickly. Youth does that. He offered everything in exchange for leniency. His testimony corroborated ours perfectly. Clara's texts, voice notes, promises, each one a nail. I stayed invisible. Visibility invites bargaining. I wanted none. Clara was indicted on multiple counts: bank fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. The language was stark, unadorned. She read it aloud, as if volume might change meaning. She hired an aggressive defense team. They attempted contact. I refused. Silence is a form of testimony. Friend called. I didn't answer. Public opinion is irrelevant to private truth. The prosecution requested my cooperation. I agreed under one condition. I would speak only in court. No press. No statements. Precision requires a single vector. Clara began to unravel. She accused me of abandonment. She accused me of cruelty. None of that appeared in the filings. What appeared were signatures, timestamps, intent. I prepare my testimony like a code review. Every claim supported. Every assumption challenged. No adjectives. The night before the hearing, Clara left a note on my desk. It appealed to history, to shared moments, to mercy. I archived it. Memories are data. They don't override outcomes. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Intimate. Efficient. Clara sat at the defense table, pale, scanning the room for me. She believed I'd arrive as salvation. When my name was called, she smiled. Then she saw where I was walking. Not toward her, toward the witness stand. The shift was immediate. Her posture collapsed inward, like a system losing power. I swore in, sat down, met no one's eyes. The prosecutor asked questions that require numbers, not feelings. I answered them. Transaction amounts, access logs, signature analysis. Clara's attorney objected often. The judge overruled patiently. Evidence has weight. When shown the forged documents, I explained calmly how they differed from my authentic signatures. Pressure variance, temporal drift. The room listened. Expertise commands silence. Clara shook her head, whispering. She still thought this was a misunderstanding. It wasn't. It was a design flaw exposed under stress. The prosecution introduced the investigator's findings. Timelines aligned. Motives clarified. The jury watched Clara as if seeing her for the first time. I was asked why I didn't intervene earlier. I said intervention would have compromised the investigation. That was true. It was also sufficient. Clara's attorney tried to frame me as vindictive. I responded with facts. Vindictiveness is emotional. This was procedural. When asked if I sought restitution, I declined. The room shifted again. That surprised them. It shouldn't have. Money was never the objective. Clara took the stand. She spoke about love, about pressure, about mistakes. She avoided the word fraud. The jury noticed. In closing, the prosecutor spoke of trust abused. The defense spoke of marriage strained. Only one of those is a crime. I waited. Waiting is easy when the outcome is already computed. The verdict arrived without drama. Guilty on all counts. The sound Clara made then was small, involuntary. Like air escaping a punctured seal. Sentencing was scheduled weeks later. I did not attend. My role was complete. Clara attempted contact from detention. Letters. Calls. Apologies that circled the truth without landing on it. I did not respond. At sentencing, she received years, not months. White-collar crimes carry weight when documented thoroughly. The judge cited premeditation, abuse of trust, lack of remorse. I closed the last shared account that afternoon. The house felt larger immediately. People asked if I felt relief. Relief implies tension. I felt alignment. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't gloat. It corrects. I didn't take her money. I didn't ruin her life. I removed myself from her crimes and let the system do what it was designed to do. Freedom isn't mercy. It's the absence of obligation. And when I walked out of that courthouse for the last time, alone and unencumbered, I understood the final calculation clearly. I didn't seek revenge. I sought accuracy. And accuracy took her freedom, not her money. Time behaves differently after a verdict. For Clara, it slowed to a crawl measured in appeals and intake procedures. For me, it accelerated. I finalized the divorce in a single hearing. No contest. No assets to divide. The fraud had already done that work for us. I returned to routines with surgical discipline. Gym at 6. Code reviews by 8. Capital calls in the afternoon. People assumed resilience. In truth, this was simply reversion to baseline. Emotional deviation is temporary if you don't feed it. Occasionally, I reviewed the case file again, not out of longing, but to ensure nothing remained unresolved. I dislike dangling variables. Liam accepted a plea deal. Reduced sentence. Predictable. He sent a message through counsel, thanking me for being fair. I deleted it unread. Fairness had nothing to do with it. Clara's final letter arrived stamped and screened. It claimed she finally understood. Understanding after consequences is not insight, it's compliance. I archived the letter with the others. People mistake closure for forgiveness. Closure is just the point where analysis ends. The media cycle tried briefly to turn the story into spectacle. Wealthy husband. Fraudulent wife. I declined interviews. Narratives decay without oxygen. At work, a junior analyst asked how I'd known so early. I told him systems always reveal misuse if you're patient enough to look. Trust doesn't negate verification. It demands it. I liquidated one property and relocated. New city, new address, familiar anonymity. Freedom isn't dramatic. It's quiet and procedural. On a flight west, I thought briefly about Clara's assumption that my resources would insulate her from consequence. It was a common error. Money amplifies reach, not immunity. If anything, it sharpens accountability. I reviewed my own failures clinically. Shared access without oversight. Emotional proximity mistaken for operational safety. Lessons documented. Controls updated. At altitude, turbulence shook the cabin. People tensed. I didn't. Turbulence is just unmodeled input. You account for it or you crash. By the time we landed, the past had reduced itself to data, immutable, complete, and no longer actionable. Clara's sentencing transcript was published online. I read it once. The judge spoke of deterrence and public trust. Clara cried when the years were announced. I noted the number and moved on. Some nights, memory attempted intrusion. Laughter. Plans. A version of her that believed in partnership. I treated those thoughts like corrupted files, identified, isolated, dismissed. Nostalgia is a bias. I received confirmation that restitution would be pursued through her future earnings. That was fine. Irrelevant, but fine. Money is renewable. Time is not. A colleague asked if I felt victorious. Victory implies competition. This was correction. The final administrative step was closing the case number attached to my name. When the clerk confirmed, I felt the faintest pressure lift. That was it. No catharsis. Just completion. I poured a drink that evening, measured precisely, and sat by the window. The city moved below, indifferent. That indifference felt earned. Some people confuse mercy with weakness. Others confuse cruelty with strength. Both misunderstand leverage. Months later, I was called once more to testify briefly at a related civil proceeding. Clara was present via video, thinner, quieter, watching me as if searching for miscalculation. There was none. I answered the same way I always had, succinctly, factually, without ornament. The judge thanked me for clarity. Clarity ends disputes faster than empathy ever could. When it was over, Clara spoke my name. I did not respond. Engagement creates false hope. Walking out, I passed the courtroom where new cases were being docketed. Different names. Same errors. People believing intimacy overrides structure. It doesn't. Outside, the air was cold and clean. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No obligations. I understood then what she never had. Revenge is inefficient because it keeps you bound to the target. Justice, properly applied, cuts the cord. I didn't engineer her downfall. I documented it. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the standard of proof. Systems don't care about intention. They care about input and outcome. Clara supplied both. Life normalized completely after that. No echoes. No loose ends. I funded 2 new ventures and declined a third. Selectivity improves with experience. Occasionally, someone would mention Clara in passing, lowering their voice. I never corrected them. The story wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to records and sentencing guidelines. I kept one artifact from the entire process, the first printed statement with the mislabeled withdrawals. Not as a warning, but as a reminder. The moment the math broke. People ask what I do differently. I tell them nothing after discovery. Before it, everything. Prevention is quieter than response. On my desk now, there are no photographs. Just screens and clean surfaces. Minimalism isn't aesthetic. It's operational. I don't regret love. I regret unmanaged access. That distinction matters. Freedom isn't the absence of attachment. It's the presence of boundaries that hold under pressure. Clara crossed them, assuming elasticity. She learned they were rigid by design. If there is a final lesson, it's this. Emotion invites negotiation. Precision ends it. I didn't stand in that courtroom to humiliate my wife. I stood there to state facts under oath. The humiliation was a byproduct of evidence, not intent. Clara believed wealth would cushion impact. She believed marriage diluted responsibility. She believed I would choose pity over process. Each belief was a misread of the system she tried to exploit. When the door closed behind me for the last time, I felt no triumph, just correctness, the kind that settles quietly and doesn't ask to be admired. I didn't seek to take her money. Money was always incidental, replaceable, abstract. I sought resolution. I sought separation. I sought freedom in its most literal form. And the only way to secure mine was to let the law take hers.